Spring of 1945 carried a silence across Germany that was more frightening than artillery. Towns stood in ruin, their cobblestones split by shellfire, their windows blown out like eyes staring into emptiness. For civilians, the war was not an abstraction, but a hunger gnawing at the belly, a shadow at every door, and the steady, terrifying knowledge that the Reich was collapsing. In one of these towns, half rubble, half smoke, 3 German women found themselves surrounded. They had hidden in a cellar for days, clutching scraps of bread, listening to the distant roll of tanks. When the American soldiers arrived, the women expected the worst. They had heard the warnings, whispered in panicked voices. The Americans will show no mercy. They will humiliate you. They will take everything. The soldiers came quickly, boots echoing on the broken stones, rifles leveled. The women stepped into the open with their hands raised. They were not soldiers, not partisans, only civilians. But in that moment, they felt the same fear as any captured enemy. The youngest, Liesel, barely 19, whispered a prayer through cracked lips, her voice trembling as if the words themselves were too fragile to survive. The Americans did not fire. Instead, they shouted orders in English, words the women could not fully understand. Their arms were pulled behind their backs, ropes tied loosely but firmly. They were marched away, past the wreckage of their own homes, past the neighbors who stared silently from doorways, too broken to intervene. Every step deepened their dread. Where were they being taken? To a prison camp? To face public humiliation? Or worse, execution? They had no answers, only the pounding of their own hearts. At the edge of town, beyond the skeletal ruins of a church, they were led into a camp hastily built on the outskirts. Barbed wire ringed the perimeter. Inside, German prisoners of war huddled in groups, their uniforms ragged, their eyes hollow. The sight only deepened the women's despair. They were placed in a separate enclosure, watched closely by guards. Hours passed. Hunger gnawed, thirst burned, but no food came. Only the relentless gaze of soldiers who paced with rifles slung across their shoulders. As night fell, the air grew cold. The women huddled together, whispering memories of home. Liesel spoke of her mother's kitchen, of the smell of bread that had once filled the air. Another, Greta, remembered her brother, lost on the Eastern Front, his last letter tucked into her pocket. Anna, the oldest, said nothing. She simply stared at the barbed wire, her face lined with exhaustion, as if words had long ago lost their power. The next morning, the unexpected happened. An American soldier approached carrying something in his hand, small, wrapped in brown paper. He stopped before the women, crouched, and set the bundle on the ground. With a nod, he stepped back. Cautiously, Greta reached for it. Her fingers trembled as she unwrapped the paper. Inside were 3 small bars of chocolate, their wrappers shiny in the pale light. For a moment, the women simply stared. Chocolate was something they had not seen in years, a memory from a childhood world that no longer existed. Liesel pressed her hand to her mouth, tears welling. Greta broke 1 bar in half, pressing a piece into Anna's palm. The taste was overwhelming, sweetness flooding a mouth long accustomed to bitterness. It was more than food, it was memory, a reminder that life had once held joy. The soldier said nothing. He only watched, then turned and walked away. That night, the women whispered in disbelief. Why had he given it to them? Was it pity, mockery, or mercy? The questions circled endlessly, yet none of them could answer. 2 days later, another surprise came. An officer entered, carrying a bundle of papers. He spoke through an interpreter. Letters, translated from your families. The women froze. Letters? From home? From families they feared dead or scattered? Their hands shook as the interpreter read. Greta heard her mother's words, trembling on the interpreter's lips. The house was bombed, but we live. We pray for your safety. Tears ran freely down her face. Liesel heard a note from her sister, written months earlier. "We dream of the day you return. Hold faith. Hold life." She clutched the words as though they were the only thing keeping her upright. Anna's letter came from a neighbor who had survived the bombings of Cologne. "Your children are alive. They wait for you." For the first time in weeks, Anna's face broke, her sobs raw and uncontrollable. The guards looked away, allowing the women their grief. That night, the three huddled together, their hands clutching the papers, their pockets hiding scraps of chocolate wrappers like relics. In their notebooks, they scribbled words that would survive long after the war. "We expected chains, humiliation, death. Instead, they gave us sweetness. Instead, they gave us the voices of home." The days that followed moved in a rhythm the women could not have imagined before their capture. They remained behind barbed wire, still prisoners, but each sunrise brought some small act that unsettled everything they thought they knew. Greta unfolded her letter again and again until the paper grew soft, the ink smudged by her tears. Anna held hers pressed against her chest each night, whispering the names of her children as if the syllables could bridge the miles of ruins between them. Liesel tucked her note under her sleeve, the words of her sister replaying in her mind until they echoed louder than the camp's silence. The chocolate wrappers, too, remained hidden treasures. Liesel would take hers out secretly, hold it to her lips and close her eyes. The taste had long faded, but the memory lingered like a spark of warmth against the coldness of war. At first, the women told themselves it was an anomaly. A single soldier's kindness, a single officer's whim. Surely it would end. Yet each evening, small gestures appeared. A guard leaving half a loaf of bread near their corner. A nurse passing by with a nod that carried no contempt. Once, an interpreter lingered after reading another letter aloud, whispering softly, "I have a sister too." The words needed no translation. But suspicion remained, stubborn as shadow. Propaganda had drilled into them for years that Americans were merciless. Some part of their minds still waited for the cruelty to arrive. Greta muttered one night, "Perhaps this is only their way of breaking us, make us think they are kind, then strike harder." Anna shook her head slowly. If cruelty was their aim, they would not waste food on us. Food is too dear in war. The truth unsettled them more than hatred ever had. Mercy was harder to bear than malice. One afternoon, the camp chaplain approached. Through the interpreter, he spoke plainly. "Tomorrow there will be a service. You may come if you wish." The women froze. Attend mass? With their captors? The idea was unthinkable. And yet the invitation lingered. Anna whispered to the others that night, "Perhaps we should go. If nothing else, it may be the only chance to hear hymns again." The following day, under guard but unchained, they walked to the small wooden chapel at the camp's edge. Lanterns flickered, casting warm light over benches filled with American soldiers, wounded prisoners, and a handful of villagers from the town beyond. The women hesitated at the threshold until a nurse shifted to make space. Slowly, they entered. The chaplain began in English, his voice low but steady. The interpreter trailed, translating into German as best he could. Words of forgiveness, of peace, of mercy carried through. GH the air. The women sat rigid, unsure whether to trust or recoil. Then the hymn began. The melody was Silent Night. Liesel pressed her hands to her face, trembling. She had sung that song as a child, her sister's hand in hers, candles flickering in the windows of a home that no longer stood. To hear it now, in the voices of enemies, was unbearable and beautiful at once. She wept silently, shoulders shaking. When the service ended, the women lingered. No one hurried them. No jeers came. The candles burned low, casting gentle shadows on faces that no longer seemed monstrous. For one fragile hour, war had retreated, replaced by something they could not name. Back in the barracks that night, Greta whispered, We prayed with them. Do you realize what that means? The enemy prays as we do. Anna closed her eyes. Perhaps the enemy is not as we were told. The following week, the kindness deepened. More letters arrived, carried across the camp by the interpreter. Some were brief, fragments scribbled on scraps of paper by relatives who had survived. Others carried stories, children sheltered in basements, villages struggling to rebuild, families clinging to life amid rubble. The women listened with tears streaming down their faces, clutching each word as though it were oxygen. Liesel's letter told of her sister's newborn child, born amid the chaos, alive despite everything. She pressed her forehead to the paper, whispering, "I have a niece. I never thought I would live to know." Chocolate appeared again, passed quietly by a young American soldier who muttered only one word: "Share." They did, breaking the small bar into slivers, savoring each fragment like a feast. Yet guilt crept into their hearts. Greta admitted one night, "My brother died fighting them. How can I accept their gifts?" Anna replied softly, "Because mercy is not a weapon. It is a bridge, and bridges are what we need most." The camp itself remained a place of hardship. The guards were not all gentle. Some spat near their feet, muttering curses. Others stared with hatred that no prayer could soften. But alongside that bitterness grew something else, small proofs that even enemies could choose compassion. One day the women were asked to help clean the infirmary. At first they hesitated, fearing it was a trick, but when they entered, they found wounded Americans sprawled on cots. Nurses worked tirelessly, sweat streaking their brows. A nurse handed Anna a bucket and cloth. No orders of cruelty followed. They were simply expected to help. Anna wiped the forehead of a soldier burning with fever. He opened his eyes briefly, confusion flickering before he whispered, "Danke." She froze. The word was German, spoken with an accent but unmistakable. She nearly dropped the cloth, her heart racing. The nurse nearby only nodded as if to say, "Yes, we see you, we trust you with this." That night Anna scribbled in her hidden scrap, "I touched the brow of an enemy, and he thanked me in my own tongue. The world is no longer what I was told." Summer came with the smell of rain on broken stone and the rumble of trucks moving eastward. The war was ending, though no one inside the camp spoke of it with certainty. Rumors swept like smoke. Hitler was dead, Berlin had fallen, surrender was signed. Yet the women knew only what their guards allowed them to hear, and the silence often said more than the words. Still, small acts continued to shape their captivity. Letters arrived irregularly, but when they did, the women clutched them with a reverence deeper than prayer. Each word was a lifeline to a home they feared destroyed. Greta's mother wrote of ration lines and bombed-out streets, but also of neighbors who still shared bread when they could. Anna's children scribbled notes in shaky handwriting, words barely legible yet more precious than gold. Liesel's sister described the baby growing strong despite hunger. "Oh, child of war born into rubble yet still laughing." Chocolate, too, appeared again, though rarely. A guard slipped them a single bar one evening, his face unreadable. He said nothing, but his eyes softened when Anna bowed her head in thanks. They broke the bar into slivers, savoring each crumb as if it were a banquet. The sweetness lingered on their tongues long after, a reminder that even in ruin, joy had not been erased. But guilt still pressed heavy. Greta whispered one night, "How do we accept their gifts when they killed our brothers?" Silence followed. Then Anna answered quietly, "Perhaps mercy does not erase grief. Perhaps it simply keeps us human long enough to carry it." In July, the chaplain invited them once more to Mass. By then, they no longer hesitated. They walked into the chapel with heads lowered but hearts less rigid. The benches creaked as they sat among Americans and villagers. When the hymn rose, they joined softly, voices trembling but real. The guards did not stop them. For the first time, They were not outsiders in that place of worship. One afternoon, the chaplain placed a book in Hannah's hands, a Bible with passages marked in both English and German. "Read," he said through the interpreter. She did, her fingers tracing words she had not seen in years. The letters blurred as tears filled her eyes. She whispered, "I thought such words were lost." The camp itself still bore hardship. Sickness lingered, hunger gnawed, and fear never fully left. Some guards remained hostile, their stares like knives. But alongside cruelty, compassion had rooted itself. The women carried both realities in their hearts, hatred sharpened by grief and mercy offered in the smallest of gestures. When the war's official end was announced in August, the camp erupted. Americans cheered, embracing one another, tears streaming down faces hardened by years of killing. The women sat in stunned silence. The Reich was gone. The war that had consumed their families, their homes, their entire world had ended. Days later, the interpreter brought news that left them trembling. "You will be released. You may go home." Home. The word was almost unbearable in its strangeness. Did home still exist? Would they return to rubble, to graves, to silence where voices once filled rooms? None of them knew. But freedom, even uncertain, felt like a miracle. Before they left, the chaplain approached with a small parcel. Inside were chocolate bars wrapped neatly and copies of their letters. "Carry these," he said, "so you remember not only war but also mercy." The women wept openly, clutching the gifts. They had expected chains, humiliation, perhaps death. Instead, they left with sweetness and words from those they loved. Years later, when the women were old and grey, their children and grandchildren would ask about the war. They would speak of hunger, of fear, of ruined cities. But they would also speak of the Americans, of chocolate shared across barbed wire, of letters carried across battle lines, of hymns sung in a chapel where enemies prayed side by side. Greta's diary preserved the words best. "History will record battles and bombs, but I will remember the taste of chocolate in captivity and the sound of letters read aloud when I believed my family lost. We expected death. Instead, they gave us back life in fragments, sweet and fragile, enough to carry us home." The wrappers and letters remained, folded carefully into boxes, passed down as relics. Not treasures of wealth, but treasures of memory, the proof that even in the darkest of times, mercy could appear where it was least expected.